Okay, good evening, everyone. Simon Jacobson here. I welcome you all. And I bring you warm regards from Moscow, where I spent last Wednesday night giving a lecture that was simultaneously translated. And as some of you may have read my weekly dispatch from Moscow, it was extremely moving, emotional trip for me. For the obvious reasons that my father was born there, my grandfather was arrested there. But the whole Moscow Russian culture is embedded in my genes. And I don't want to spend this evening talking about it, but it definitely has empowered me. I come back very energized and very driven to shake up the status quo. So I hope you indulge me and allow me the permission. Even if you don't, I'm not really asking for permission, to be honest. But it's as a courtesy, as I'm just mentioning, it's nice to always. I invite you to join me in shaking up the status quo, and time to generate some real change, especially with the entire crisis of the world going on right now. So much upheaval, unknown, and uncertainty. Is definitely a great opportunity to, let's put it this way, to introduce a new paradigm shift, as they say. Because you see, one of the things about uncertainty, fear, crisis, upheaval, is that it reveals the cracks in our existing institutions that we so invested and have given so much power, and that have we expected security and promise and hope. So when there's a crack in this, the veneer, a crack in the institutions themselves, so yes, on one hand, the crack is very unnerving, because nobody wants to have a crack in your foundations. On the other hand, however, cracks also allow you to peek in, peer in, and see light and new realities that may be emerging through the cracks. So a crack has two sides to it. On one hand, it's unnerving and disturbing, because the past that we've relied on so much is shaken, but at the same time, it allows the opportunity to introduce something new. So when you see a crack in an egg, you may think it's very disturbing, but at the same time, suddenly a chick pops its head out of the egg. That's how birth happens. All birthing always happens through a crack in the existing reality. The child that emerges from the womb, the creativity that emerges from frustration, the energy that emerges from any type of tension, any type of friction, is always the most powerful of all. So yes, we don't like necessarily to be part of and feel the pain or feel the loss or the shifting going on. But if you're wise, and the Talmud says, Ezu chacham harayas haneled, who is the wise person? The one who sees the birthing. That's the word used, the birthing. In other words, they don't look at any event as an event isolated in a vacuum. They see every event, even a challenging one, even a troubling one, as a birthing of something greater. So now looking at the bigger picture, these cracks can end up becoming the source for the greatest forms of change and revolution. Now, I know some say, well, listen, the world is good as it is, what do we need revolution? That's another discussion, whether it was actually good or just because we're comfortable doesn't mean it's good. It just means we're comfortable. So, as, who was it, which auto manufacturer put it? I saw the advertisement on one of the billboards. More status, less quo. That's the objective. To shake up the status quo. And let's put it this, the equilibrium of our comfort zones and of the mediocrity and I guess as Thoreau put it, the life of quiet desperation that so many people live and lead. Sometimes more quiet, less quiet than other times. And I think of the opportunity, like in times that we're living right now, for those that can see a bigger picture, and those that have seen the picture even when things were going well, to not take that too seriously, can realize that there is the birthing of a new paradigm, if we allow it to be so. Even if it does not necessarily take hold by the critical mass, but the challenge that we have is it should take hold in our life, in your critical mass, in your personal life. Because after all, it all begins with how your attitude is. To wait around for others to react and us to react to the other reactions is obviously the behavior of a victim. Times like this also distinguish between the men and the boys, as they say. And I mean, this is not meant to be sexist. It's also the women from the girls, so to speak. It shows who's a leader, who's able to take the bull by the horns. So, as I said, coming from Moscow, I feel very energized for many, many reasons after what that country went through, and coming back to a so-called free country that has all the benefits and freedoms that this country has offered us in New York, not just recently, but over the last few decades. We have no excuse not to so-called create a revolution. So with that being said, let's go right into the topic at hand that has been advertised, as advertised. And that is, in following up to the last two classes I gave before I left to Moscow, which was prior to last week, 2 weeks ago and 3 weeks ago, the 10 plagues, the 10 psychological plagues. So as divine providence would have it, after the 10 plagues which are discussed in the chapters, in the early chapters of Exodus, namely the chapter of Era and Boy, the second and third chapter of the book of Exodus, discuss the 7 and 3 plagues respectively, as we discussed at length. Then comes the next chapter as the Jews leave Egypt. And then we are now in the next chapter in Exodus, which is chapter number, as we go, Shmois Ve'era Boy B'Shal Chisrei. I can't count. The 5th chapter of Exodus, which is the Jews arriving 49 days from the day that they left Egypt. They arrive at Sinai. So it's the historical events of Sinai that is the main theme of this week's chapter. And of course, Sinai itself is highlighted by what has become known as the 10 Commandments, the Aseres HaDibros, in Hebrew, the 10 Commandments. The truth is the word commandment is not really a translation of Dibros. When we say Aseres HaDibros, which it says, Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe, when it says like this, the beginning of the 10 Commandments, Vayidaber Elokim es kol hadvarim ha'ela. God spoke all these words. Dvarim, the word for dvarim or dibros, which is the Hebrew word for, is not commandments. Commandment would be tzivuyim, pkudos, mitzvahs, mishpatim, chukim, edus. The word for dvarim actually really means 10. Davar in Hebrew is a word. Davar can also mean an expression. So these are the expressions, 10 expressions. Some people even connect the word dibros to the word 10 models, 10 movements, 10 prototypes. So the 10 commandments are much more than just commandments. For some reason, the word commandment caught on and became the name of a popular movie, and that's it. And so for posterity, this is the way it's remembered. But just for the record, Aseres HaDibros is much more than 10 commandments. And I think it'll become clear why as we go through this evening. So the theme of this evening is to focus on these 10 commandments. And particularly, which are no coincidences, they correspond to the 10 plagues, and they correspond to other forms of 10 that we shall discuss. So many people know the 10 commandments, contemporary, and the contemporary world, as I said, some know it for the film by DeMille. Others understand the 10 Commandments as being the first formal moral code in history that has become the basis of democracy and civilization, civil law. The 10 Commandments have other ways that they've become popular and very famous, basis of many, many systems. But what's less known is this, that like everything in the Torah, both the number and the details reflect a much deeper spiritual system that is not always so obvious to the naked eye. So just like it is in the physical world, when we look at things, what we see with the eyes is only the material surface, only the superficial veneer But we know and we understand and we feel that beneath it all is brewing energy, full of energy. So just like yourself, look at yourself. So to the outside person, to someone looking at you from the outside, may not know what's going on inside of you right now. Whether you're sad or you're happy, whether you're at peace or not, whether you're crying inside or laughing inside, whatever you're going through. Sometimes our innermost feelings do come and burst forth even in uncontrollable ways. But many times they don't. And many times you can put on a face that actually contradicts what you're really feeling. There are people who smile and they're really crying. There are people who smile and they're trying to stab you in the back. And so on. There's echad b'peh, echad b'lev in the expression. You say one thing and you feel another. We have this ability to duplicitousness, of being deceptive in a way. So what you see is never what you get, basically. You cannot judge a book by its cover. And everybody does, unfortunately. That's what marketing is so much about. So the same is true with the Torah. On the surface level, it's 10 commandments. You have very basic commandments. I am your God. Do not have false gods, and so on. But beneath it lies a complex and eloquent system, structure of the 10 basic building blocks of existence. And thus, as a result of that, it evolves and manifests into these 10 guidelines, or to these 10 phrases or words or statements or prototypes. And the key to this is also a methodology. I'm not here to just teach you that the facts that lie the deeper story behind the story of the 10 Commandments, but also teach you methodology. The methodology of it is that when you see something in Torah, you always look at all the details. For instance, in this case, it's 10. Why not 11? Why not 15? Why not 20? Why not 5? Why not 1? So when you see the number 10, in Torah, there's the concept of applying numbers and seeing what else exists that's in the number 10. And that's another way of discovering the deeper meaning in things. So it's just a method of how one discovers when you look at something in externals. And this is true, the scientific method, this is true for anything that requires any type of research, anything that you want to see beneath the surface. How do you really do it? It's a detective game. It's a investigation. You investigate, explore, and any detail cannot be missed, because you don't know what detail is going to reveal a deeper truth. So if it's the case that way in a scene crime of a scene, the same is true, of course, in positive things. You want to truly understand somebody. Like just a few days ago, before I left Moscow, someone called me. They wanted to consult with me on the phone about a very, very personal matter. So if they were not in the city, not around, there's no choice. You talk by phone. But I said to the person, I think it's wiser to such a topic to speak face to face. Even though it may be uncomfortable for you, the phone has a little anonymity. But in truth, the real reason, as I told the person, I said, is because when you're talking about especially intimate and personal things, it's more than just the words that are spoken. There's body language, there's eye contact, there's where you get fidgety, there's where you're comfortable. And also both ways. It's not just to see the person that I'm speaking to. That person also, if they're going to confide in me, has to feel trust. And trust is usually not established purely by email or faxes or even on camera here online, with all due respect to the listening audience here. Trust is established through personal contact, through seeing things, through a vibe. It's sometimes even intangible. Why do we trust certain people and certain people we don't trust? You can't always even put your finger on it. It's more than just technical. Some people say all the right things, you still don't trust them. Other people say all the wrong things and you trust them. And I'm not talking about being manipulated. I'm talking about, because there's something, hearts feel a heart. A heart feels a heart. As they say, words from the heart enter the heart. Words that come out of your mouth or your brain enter one ear and go out the other. This is a statement from some of the middle-aged scholars. So there's something about the personal that you see that is difficult to capture. And therefore you have to look at every detail. There are details sometimes a person is speaking, and they may be thinking that they're sharing with you the most important parts of their life. And the truth is you really learn more about their life of how they don't speak, or what they don't say, or how they shift their eyes, or other things that most people don't even realize they're projecting. So when you're studying the Torah, if you really want to understand its deeper meaning, you have to also apply that type of seriousness. As a serious student, of looking at the details. So 10 commandments. Why 10? So the number 10 immediately evokes other areas of 10, which, as I mentioned, just 2 chapters back, the 10 plagues. So you'd say, well, 10 plagues and 10 commandments is pretty antithetical. 10 commandments are like the commandments of God, how to live up to our greatest potential. 10 plagues are 10 curses. But then there's another 10, number 10. And this comes from, some of you may be familiar with it in the Pirkei Avot, the Ethics of the Fathers. It says, Ba'asara Mamoros Nivra Ha'olam. That with 10 utterances, with 10 words, with 10 expressions, the world was created. And it's referring to the 10 times in the book of Genesis, which describes the creation, the 10 different expressions that God uses to create. For instance, the first one is, Vayomer Elokim Yehi Or. God said, Vayomer, God said, let there be light. And there was light. There are 10 such utterances. But if you count them, you'll find there's only 9. So the Mishnah says, Bereshis Nami Maimerhu. Bereshis, the first verse in the entire book of Genesis is what? Bereshis Bara Elokim, in the beginning God created heaven and earth. So you'd think that's a third-party description. It's not an utterance of God's words. And the Medrash says, the Mishnah says, no, that too is an utterance. So therefore we have 10 expressions there. So here we have 10 different phrases that God uses to create the universe, 10 plagues, 10 commandments. Now if you're truly knowledgeable, you'll also know, and you're a little Kabbalistic twist to your life, you'll know that in the Kabbalistic teachings, there's another 10. It's called the 10 spheres, or in Hebrew, Sfirot, the Esser spheres. This is from an expression in the book of Yitzro, the Sefer Yitzro, the book of formation, which is attributed by some to Abraham, others attributed to Rabbi Akiva. But regardless, it's a very reliable and very classic work. Some see it as the first, literally the first Kabbalistic text of all texts. There is an opinion that there was a text before it composed by Adam called Rizil HaMalach, but that's not for here. But Sefer Yitzro is definitely one of the first, if not the first. And if it's attributed to Abraham, obviously it goes back a long way. And it's called the Book of Formation. It's been translated, a very powerful and very accurate translation by Aryeh Kaplan, the Book of Formation. It's available, where he tries to decipher it. It's a book that's quite cryptic, but he deciphers it as best as his ability, using commentaries and so on. So there's an expression there, which is cryptic, until you study the Zohar and later Kabbalistic texts. The expression goes, very poetic, Esses spheres blima. There are 10 spheres, you can say 10 emanations, blima, without substance. And then he continues, Esser v'lei tesha, Esser v'lei yachad aser, Esser v'lei tesha. 10 but not 9, 10 but not 11. So in previous classes I've discussed what the significance of the 10 versus 11 and 9. I even wrote an article about 9/11 in 2001. 9/11, both 9 and 11 is exactly what the Sefer Yitzro is negating. Not 10 and not 11 and not 9, but 10. Which is, as the Kabbalists explain, the full spectrum, the complete cycle of life is 10. Even in mathematics, when you talk about 3 dimensions, so 3 times 3 dimensions is 9, and the center, the so-called nucleus, is 10. In subatomic structure and atomic structure, you'll also find the number 10. So you look around, 10 is a very round number, not just technically so, because 10 actually reflects, it's not just because we chose 10 and not 11. 10 has a certain balance to it in the structure of the universe. 10 different dimensions. That's why the metric system, which the Europeans so proudly like to condescendingly describe Americans' abstinence not to embrace the perfect cycle of 10. We have our own weird inches and gallons and so on. But it's interesting, of all things that are 10, they also proposed, I don't know if you know this, that there should be 10 days of the week. And then you really would have it. Everything would be 10. Instead of 7 days, 10 days. But that was never embraced, not in Europe and not in the United States and not anywhere in the world. Some say the reason is because people could not wait 10 days for weekends. It just would be, the suicide rate would go up too high, and there'd be too many other depressing elements. Even 7 days, as it is, has become 4-day weeks and 3-day weeks, and so on. But in Kabbalistic thought, there's actually a reason why there's 7 days, because there in time, the cycle of 7 actually has prominence. But in space, 10 is the primary number, and becomes the number which is, that's why mathematics is the perfectly round number. 10 singles, and so on, 10, 100, 1,000, and it's the number 1 essentially with zeros. Which again, even in computer language, you have 1 and zeros. Again, it adds up, 1 and a 0 is a 10. So the 1s and 0s, which is the basic language of every computer, is driven also by the number 10. I can go on and on, the list goes on, but when you look at all this, you realize that the number 10 of 10 Commandments is something more profound. So briefly, and then I'll go through the actual 10 Commandments. Briefly, the story is this. It all originates from the DNA of existence, of how the inner structure is actually comprised of 10 dimensions. And if you recall, we talked about those 10 dimensions also in the personality of a human being. Our psyches are made up of 10 pieces, or 10 components, 10 dimensions. 3 intellectual ones, 3 cognitive skills, and 7 emotional ones. 3 cognitive faculties, 7 emotional ones. And just to briefly sum it up again, some of you have my book on the Omer, there I talk about the 7. But there's another 3, so to briefly sum it up, it goes, the 3 can be seen, they're measured twice, different ways. Usually they're measured, Chachma Bina Das, Chabad. Chachma Bina Das is conception, comprehension, and understanding. Sometimes translated as wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. But briefly, Chachma is the spark of an idea. Bina is its embellishment, the fleshing out of an idea. Das is the conclusion. When you snap your finger and say, aha, I got it, that's it. The conclusion of a cognitive process. Then begins the 7 emotional cycle, spectrum, and that is the 7 emotions which encompass all human emotions, is chesed, love and kindness, gvura, discipline, severity, chesed, giving, chesed, gvura would be like withholding, tiferes is compassion or beauty, netzach, the 4th, is ambition, endurance, hoid is humility, yielding, yesod is bonding, foundation, bonding, connection, intimacy, and finally malchus is dignity. The word malchus, kingdom, kingship, dignity, it's sovereignty. And I will go through it. I'm not going to explain them right now. I'll explain them as we go through it. I already did. Those of you that were here by the 10 plague discussion, I went through it in more detail, but I will do so as well now. So when you understand these 10 dimensions, these 10 building blocks, you can begin to relate to not only your life and people around you, but also all of existence is multiple configurations, complex configurations of these 10 interacting with each other. Not to complicate matters, but it does get complicated. The 10 are the basic building blocks. But if you ask me, is there such a thing as pure chesed? There isn't. Just like there's no such thing as pure hydrogen or pure oxygen. They all are hybrids that have other elements in them. There's a primary element, and that's what defines that particular personality. But they all, what we call in Hebrew, in the Kabbalistic and Hasidic language, called hitkalalut. Hitkalalut means they're all interwoven. They all encompass all of them. It would be like saying a person is intellectual, another person is emotional. So we're not simplistic in thinking that there are people that are pure intellect. There's no such thing as pure intellect. Every human being also has a heart. Some people are driven primarily by their mind, by the cognitive skills. Others are driven by their emotions. So let's say chesed and gvura. In your heart, some people are just born that way in families that are very giving. It's easy to give. Others are born into families that are very stingy. It's hard for them to give. But both of them have chesed and both have gvura. It's just a question of measure and intensity. So in the Kabbalistic system, just to explain it in a little more detail, it's an interwoven process, meaning chesed has within it gvura of chesed. It has within it tiferes of chesed, the compassion of love. It has the endurance of love. It has the humility of love. It has the intimacy of love, or the bonding of love, and it has the dignity of love. For love to be complete, it needs all 7 within the 7. The truth is, it's really 10 times 10. Within love, there's also the wisdom of love. There's also the understanding of love. There's the knowledge of love. So if you really want to understand love fully, you have to understand all 10 elements in it. And if you want to diagnose it, almost like a doctor, a soul doctor would diagnose a person's emotional condition, you wouldn't just look, are you a loving person or not a loving person? That's too generic. You have to look at the detail and find, the endurance in your love is strong, but the humility in your love may be weak. Just to give an example. Or you could have 9 strong and 1 weak. Or you could have 9 weak and 1 strong. Or you could have all 10 weak. But the point being is that it gets complicated. If you want to go even further, if you have a mathematical mind, it's not just 10 times 10, it's 10 times 10 times 10. Because when you get to the real dense, complicated discussions in Kabbalah, you'll find there is the Gvura within the Chesed within the Chesed. And you have the Chesed within the Gvura within the Chesed. Now, these are all significant, but this is not the place. This requires, obviously, a much more nuanced and refined and, nuanced and subtle understanding of human nature. But Chesed and Gvura, we all understand that you need to have both. I gave the classic example of raindrops. Rain is called Chesed or Gvura. So some places you'll find the rain is called Chesed. It's the bestowing of the blessing of water that we pray for, that waters our fields, that nourishes us. Without water, there would be no life. At the same time, there says sometimes the expression Gvuras Geshamim. The rains are called Gvura. How is it? Is it Chesed or is it Gvura? The answer is, it's Gvura of within Chesed. Meaning that if the rain would come down in buckets, torrential rains, not only would it not nourish the fields, it would destroy the fields. It would flood them. So the beauty of rain is that it comes down as water. It's not a drought, but it comes down in raindrops. Raindrops signifying the Gvura, the measure that the love, the blessing, it comes down in a spoon-fed way that the earth can absorb it and not be destroyed by it. Which, of course, is the metaphor for how we give each other love. There are people who are very loving, but they don't know how to measure it. Yes, there are people who are not loving at all and don't know how to give. But there are people who are very great givers. But the problem is they give too much, or they don't know how to stop, or they don't know how to give on the terms of the person that's receiving. Same thing is in education. There may be brilliant teachers, but being a teacher is not just knowing how to teach, it's also knowing how to measure the students you're teaching. Understanding the containers. Can the containers contain what you're giving? So you see, it's much more complicated than just love and discipline. Love is, like I said, gas. Discipline is the brakes. And you need both to drive properly. You need to know what to press on which. So with that all being said, we have this structure of 10, the 10 building blocks. And now, with that, you can begin to understand the significance of all the other 10s that I addressed earlier. So what I'm going to do here is go through actually the 10 commandments one at a time. And in the process, as some of the commentaries explain how they are actually healing agents and curing agents, healing agents to the 10 plagues, the 10 psychological plagues. But let's first begin with the 10 utterances, because it all begins from Genesis. So when it says God, Vasara Maimoris Nivra Elam, what does that mean? Vasara Maimoris Nivra Elam, it means with 10 expressions the world was created. Now, why did God need 10 expressions? He couldn't have done it in one. The Mishnah continues, actually. He could have done it in one. Could have done it in 1,000. Because the point here is that 10 is the structure of existence. So it's critical to structure it with these 10 different terms. So therefore you find the 10 different expressions, starting from Bereshis. What are these 10 utterances? So let's go through them quickly, because they'll be relevant to our discussion. So we'll go from the top down. The first is Bereshis bara Elokim. God, in the beginning, God created heaven and earth. That's the first. The second of the 10 utterances, or the 10 expressions, Asar Maimoris, is let there be light. The third is V'yemer Elokim L'havdil, where God divided the higher waters from the lower waters and created the sky. The fourth is the creation of the luminaries, celestial bodies, the sun, the moon, and the stars. Okay, the fifth is, I'm sorry, I missed one. The fourth is actually on the third day, the creation of Tacha Aretz, that God says commands the earth to deliver fruit, vegetation, which is if you think about it, it requires a particular act. That the earth is not just a dead earth; it has the power to create, to create growth. That's the fourth. The fifth are the luminaries. Okay, not to miss anything. Yeah. The sixth is that the water or the earth should give birth to creatures, the creation of animals. That's the sixth. The seventh. Are we up to six? Did I do 6 or 7? Oh, 6. Let's just make sure. 1, 2. Oh, okay. I'm sorry, I missed another one. My memory's failing me. Okay. So we have to. We'll do it again. Bereshis is the. We'll delete that from the tape. Bereshis is the beginning God created heaven and earth is the first. Should refer to my notes. The second is light. Yes, the creation of light, separating light from darkness. The creation of light. The third is, as I said, the separation of the higher waters, the lower waters. So far, so good. The one I missed was that the gathering of the waters and the allowing of earth to emerge, land to emerge. That was the fourth. The fifth is the Tache Aretz, is the one, the vegetation. Earth emerging. The fifth is Tache Aretz, which is vegetation. Sixth is the luminaries, celestial bodies. Then comes the creation of animals. Then, the creation of animals from water. Then Tacha, Aretz, Nefesh Chaya. Then the next one is the creation of animals on land. The ninth is the creation of the human being, Adam and Eve, male and female. And finally, the last of the 10 expressions in the book of Genesis is God designating that each one will find nourishment on this earth. Basically designating that people and animals, each will find nourishment. That required a special expression. These are the 10 expressions, the 10 building blocks. In different books, holy books, they discuss how these 10 refer to the 10 spheres. The 10 spheres, starting from Keser, the crown, and going all the way to Malchus, till the end. You can get it. What happens if they call again? Oh. Yeah. Well, that's the 11th utterance. Okay. Not mentioned. So, we're not going to go through the 10 spheres right now. It's not so relevant. It'll be relevant as we go through the 10 plagues and the 10 commandments. So, now, what are the 10 commandments? Anybody knows them by heart? So you're in good company. They say 80% of clergy in America don't know the 10 commandments. The 10 commandments go like this. And they correspond to these 10 expressions. And I'll explain the correspondence. Then I'll explain the connection to the spheres. And then we'll talk about the healing of the 10 plagues. Okay. So 10 commandments are, the first is Anochi Hashem Elokach, I am your God. This corresponds to the first one, that in the beginning God created heaven and earth. Is the first statement that there is a beginning. There is this grand designer, a cosmic engineer, that put it all in place. So it's the first statement in the Torah, in the Genesis, and is the first of the 10 commandments. The second one says, Lo yeh lecha, you should not have false gods, and not create idols. That corresponds to the second of the expressions, there shall be light and no darkness. Light meaning that we, human beings, should choose light, the path of light, and not the path of false gods, basically. Darkness referring to all the things that conceal the truth. The third commandment is you shall not use God's name in vain. And that corresponds with the third expression, where God separates the higher from the lower. In other words, what does the third commandment really add? If you believe in God and you do not believe in false gods, what's the third commandment add? The third commandment adding that even if you believe in God, you have to be careful how you live your life, how you express yourself. There are many people believe in God, but sometimes when it comes to action or words, they don't live up to it. So there's also understanding that there's a heaven and there's an earth. There's a separation of what is profane and what is holy, which is essentially like the separation of the higher waters and the lower waters, corresponding to the third commandment, corresponding to the third expression. The fourth is the gathering of the waters and the emergence of earth. This corresponds to the fourth commandment, which is the commandment of Shabbos. What is Shabbos? Shabbos is a recognition that there are 6 days of the week, and there's a seventh day, as the Chinuch and other commentaries explain, that you should remember that there is that someone put this earth in place. So the idea of recognizing that there's a division between water and land is similar to understanding there's a division between 6 days of the week of work and the day of holy day. The idea of recognizing the diversity of the universe, the Havdalah, the separations, are divinely structured. The fifth commandment is honoring your parents, which corresponds to the vegetation. I think the connection is obvious. Parents, children are called offspring. Children are called the fruit that human beings yield is essentially comparable to the vegetation that the earth produces. So the same blessing that was given to the earth, you shall produce fruit, is a blessing given to human beings. You shall produce the power to produce children. And the respect of the fruit to its producer is similar to the respect we, human beings, have to those that so-called brought us into this world. That's the fifth commandment. Then comes the sixth commandment, and this goes now over to the negatives and the ones that are more mundane, so to speak. The sixth commandment is thou shalt not murder. That corresponds to the sixth expression, which is that there be the luminaries in heaven. When a person murders, the Talmud says, it's like you put out a light. Every human being is a luminary. Every human being gives off a particular unique light. Murder is not just the crime of murder, it's also destroying the contribution. God created a human being to bring certain light into this world, and a person murders that. They're not just murdering a human being, they're murdering the light of the divine light, the unique light that each of us gives off. So that's the sixth. The seventh commandment is to not commit adultery, sexual prohibitions. And that refers to the next one, Yitro Tzamayim Resheres, because it says, well, some commentaries explain it this way, that when God commanded that the water should produce animals, He didn't command which animals should come from which animals. And the animals did not interbreed. Animals bred with each other, with their own species. So therefore they explain that this is similar to the sexual boundaries that that refers to this. That's referred to in the seventh, right? Seventh commandment, right? The eighth commandment is do not steal, lesignev. Do not steal, and that corresponds to the next one, which is Teitze Eretz Nefesh Chaya, that the earth should give the animal, the creation of the land animals. And commentaries explain the connection here that that land animals are known to not steal from each other. Whatever they have is their cycle of life that they have is their own cycle. The fact that they're predators and the fact that there are prey is part of the cycle of life. As a matter of fact, it's part of the benevolent cycle, because if we did not have predators and prey, in direct proportion, if you know this historical fact, in direct proportion to creatures that are consumed by bigger creatures, by predators, they multiply in that same order. In other words, there's much more vegetables in this earth than there are animals. And there are much less predators than there are prey. So if the predators did not feed on that prey, we would have the world would be destroyed. And this is a very fascinating cycle. So the balance of nature is really a balance that everyone has what they deserve, and no one has to take away from anyone else. And when certain creatures are so-called killed by others, it's part of the gift of life to keep the balance going. Like, for instance, they recently documented, if certain predators in the wild would not eat the locust which multiply in such great numbers, would destroy the fields. And the cycle continues. This is just a simple example. If you read some of the, what do they call it, the eco-balance of the earth, you'll find there's sometimes 30, 40 steps that if the algae in a certain sea are for some reason contaminated, let's say through toxic waste, human toxic waste, as a result, the certain coral is destroyed. As the coral is destroyed, small fish are destroyed. Small fish are destroyed. The larger fish are destroyed. Then the balance completely thrown off, and at some point, it actually affects the temperature of this earth, and so on and so forth. So the fascinating balance tells us that the earth is created in a way where there's a balance between all creatures, and there's no one has more than needed, and no one has less than needed, which of course corresponds to the 8th commandment, which is do not steal, because everyone has what they get. And if you steal, the balance will have to be rearranged, meaning you will somewhere have to lose what you stole because you disturbed the balance. It's of course based on faith as opposed to greed, but it's based on the understanding that there is justice and there is a certain natural balance to existence. So it corresponds to the 8th expression, the balance of nature of the creatures of this earth, which teach us about honesty, essentially. The 9th commandment is do not bear false witness on your neighbor or on another person. And this corresponds to the 9th expression, which is, what is it? Human being, right. The creation of the human being. So there's some commentaries explain it very beautifully like this. When God created the human being, the expression is God created the human being in the divine image, which essentially is God bearing witness, that a human being is a witness to the divine presence. To the extent that this is, vital, that there's a tselem elikim. I will discuss this a little later, more in depth, when we talk about the plagues. Ultimately, when we say that a person has a majesty, has a uniqueness, there's a law in the Torah that says, for instance, that if someone is put to death for whatever reason, even the most severe crime possible, you're not allowed to allow that person to remain exposed overnight. Even though the person may have been a cruel mass murderer. You cannot humiliate a person. Death is has to be done with a certain humility and so on. Why? It says because this person is the divine image. So even if a person desecrated their own image, it still has a sanctity. Every human being has sanctity. So the sanctity of life is expressed in the Torah's words that we are all created in the divine image. It means a human being is not a negligible entity. Even in the worst scenario, even if you have to punish someone, even if someone experienced crimes, we don't smile about it. We cry that the divine image of this human being has been so defiled. As the Talmud says, that when the Egyptians were drowning, last week's chapter, in the sea, and they were Nazis, period. These were people who for 210 years oppressed for no reason other than Jews being Jews, killed many. And even when they let them go, finally, they still could not tolerate, so they pursued them. So you'd think they deserved their lot. Yet it says when they were drowning in the sea, the angels began singing praise to God, and God said, my creatures are drowning and you sing praise. No, that doesn't work that way. You should be crying that human beings could stoop and have defiled their own destiny to the extent that there was no choice, but they end up killing themselves, actually. It's self-destructive. That's what happened. So, yes, they may have deserved it, but that doesn't mean we celebrate. It means we cry that God puts creatures on this earth that have so defiled themselves, have so desecrated their own calling. So to go back now to the 9th commandment, this 9th commandment, which in a way you could say stands out in a very strange way, like it doesn't even seem to fit. Okay, not to kill, fine. Not to adultery, not sexual inappropriate behavior, not to steal, but something not to bear witness, false witness on a person. So of course it's a very obvious and very, very terrible crime. What is its real crime? It's the abuse of another human being. So the 9th commandment is much broader than it's not just about getting up in court and lying and bearing false witness on a person and saying that person did something they never did, which we know in history was a common practice in many regimes. That's what they did. They found false witnesses. But there's something much more profound. That is the ultimate abuse of another human being. It's one thing, you don't want to have a relationship with that person, but to get up to lie and say that a person did something they never did. So of course this includes slander, this is gossip, this includes all the ways that we hurt each other and kill each other. It says when a person speaks Lashon Hara on another person, 3 people are killed. The one who speaks, the one who hears, and the person they're speaking about. So you could say, well, why is the one speaking about being killed? They killed themselves. Listen, they're behaving inappropriate. He didn't do anything wrong, the third one. Yeah, but they're destroying his dignity, destroy his reputation. That's the destruction there. So the 9th commandment corresponds to the commandment in, ultimately, in the broadest sense of it, you could say the 9th commandment is respect the dignity of other human beings, because they were created in the divine image as you were. Basically respect of the rights of another person, and definitely not to accuse them falsely or even assume guilt because others said so. So this 9th commandment corresponds to the 9th expression where God said, Nasa Adam, let us create the human being in the divine image. And finally, the 10th commandment, thou shalt not covet your neighbor's property, family, wife, and so on. Lo sachmed, sometimes translated, thou shalt not envy. It's a commandment against envy, against jealousy, against coveting on others. So this is different than lo signu, not to steal, because not to steal, as I said before, is physically going and stealing. This is not even to covet, even if you don't steal. And this corresponds to the 10th and final commandment. 10th and final expression in the creation that God designated for everyone the right amount of food they need, the right sustenance. If you truly believe that, you would have no reason to covet or to be envious of another, because you were given what you need and that person was given what they need. So the 10th commandment captures that expression. Okay. So this is on the basic level, the 10 corresponding to the 10. Now, we live in a world where all this would be very nice and good if we didn't have any temptations and there were no challenges. But that's not the universe in which we live. In the universe in which we live, we all, at different times, defy our own calling. We even defy our own infrastructure. People do it all the time. It's called being self-destructive. Sometimes it's obviously self-destructive, and sometimes it's not so obvious. But we all, at different times, do that. And this brings us to the story of Egypt that I was discussing a few weeks ago in the 10 plagues. If you recall the discussion then, we got into the point saying that this isn't just about punishment. In the Torah, punishment is cause and effect. When you live and you're affected by the psychological impact of Mitzrayim, the Hebrew word for Egypt, by constraints, by fears, by phobias, by all the inhibitions, insecurities that plague the human psyche, there will be consequences. And the consequences express themselves in the 10 plagues. And hence, the 10 plagues as being 10 psychological plagues that plague human beings. And I discussed them in detail. I will refer to them now, but in the context of the 10 commandments. So what exactly are the 10 plagues? The 10 plagues would be like this. If the 10 expressions, the way God created the universe, let's give a good analogy for this, okay? Here's a good analogy. I believe it's a good analogy. You buy a machine. What's your favorite machine? Anybody? What's your favorite gadget? Anyone has the latest? BlackBerry, that's it? Is that the consensus? Isaac, what's your favorite gadget? You like your iPod? Okay. And Justine? Really? Okay. Anybody thinks their favorite gadget is something God gave you, like not man-made? Okay. A perfect timing for the tape change. Everything rolling good? What? How many Jews does it take to change the tape? Okay. Please, you're blocking me from seeing the people, if you don't mind. Okay. So, take your gadget or computer or machine, and some people are very excited to bring home. A lot of people are excited to bring always a new machine. At least for a few minutes, it gives you a little relief from the boredom of life. And you unpack it, and it always comes with all the disclaimers, and today with all the hazard warnings, making sure everything that's dangerous to your life. So there's no legal yeah. And then there's the manuals, the operator's manual. Now some people hate reading operator's manuals, some people love reading them. I know some people who read them from cover to cover, and they can't wait to read them and all the details and so on. Most of us usually don't use all the different options and different of an application, but you need an operator's manual. So far so good. You have the machine. You follow the operator's manual that tells you this is what you do to make it work, and this is what you do that will damage the machine. If you follow that in all the steps, you'll have a humming machine, gadget, piece of equipment, application, whatever you want to call it, and it's working all right. Besides the factors of erosion or aging or accidents and so on, the machine will have its lifetime, whatever the amount of years. Let's say you abuse the rules of the engineer or of the architect or of the designer of this machine. So what will happen is, in direct effect, direct proportionate to your abuse, will be the impact on the machine. Either part of it will stop working, or all of it will stop working, or it will be temporary not working, whatever it may be. So if you think of life now as the machine, which is really the greatest gift of all, is that we exist. And life is a complex organism. So we too were given an operator's manual. It's called the Blueprint for Life, where the cosmic engineer and architect told us, here's what makes the machine work well, and here's what makes the machine not work well. If you're kind to each other, you all work better. The people you're kind to, and also you do. Some people think kindness and giving is only for others. But if you're blessed, you share with others, you're doing the benevolent thing. It's much deeper than that. Using the 10 spheres I mentioned earlier. When you're kind to another person, above all, your kindness to yourself. You're feeding and exercising the muscle, the psychological muscle called chesed in your heart and soul. Since your soul is made up of these 10 parts, as I described, you have a part called chesed. How do you exercise? How do you keep yourself strong? You have to exercise your muscles. You have to exercise your different parts of your body. Exercising one part doesn't necessarily help another part. Different foods nourish, provide the minerals, the vitamins, the nourishment for different parts of our bodies. You need calcium for certain things, iron for others, vitamin A, B, etc., etc. You look at any container, it'll give you the whole breakdown of the daily requirements or whatever the percentages are there. So different foods nourish different parts. The same is true in behavior. Different behaviors will nourish different parts of your soul, and other behaviors will damage different parts of your soul. So it's not just what you're doing to others, it's also what you do to yourself. So the Torah is this blueprint, no different than an operator's manual that tells you how this machine works and what behavior will make it work to its fullest, to actualize its potential, or, God forbid, the opposite, to damage its potential, to destroy itself, to hurt itself. Which is why those 10 Asara Mamoros were stated in the first place. The question the Zohar asks, why does God have to say, why does the Torah have to say a strange statement? Vayomer Elokim yehi or vayehi or. And God said, let there be light, and there shall be light. It should have said God created light, period. Shorter, more abbreviated, to the point. So the Zohar says, because the Torah is a blueprint, and how does an architect work with a blueprint? First you write a blueprint, you draw up a blueprint, then you look at it, and you say, here's the blueprint, now I apply it to the real world. It's like creating a sketch, creating an outline, which becomes your reference point, with which you use to build something. And you need that first step to make sure that you're honest, and make sure that what you're building, as they say in the world of carpentry, measure twice, cut once. Measure once, you'll end up cutting twice or more times. This is also used in today when you were building programming and so on. You need to know what you want in the beginning. Measure it again and again before you start writing the programs, and then you have to waste money and go back to the drawing board because you missed something. So the Torah is a model for this. Vayomer Elokim, God looked at his blueprint, and he read. It says, let there be light. That's the plan. Vayiyar, and there was light. So the 10 expressions are really the operator, the architect speaking, so to speak, reading from his own blueprint and creating in accordance to it. Follow those 10, that's the structure of existence. Mitzrayim, the descent into the world of Mitzrayim, into the world of constraints, of limitations, of concealment, is the story psychologically of human beings wandering away from the blueprint. Mitzrayim, the Egyptians, were the epitome of defying God's plan. Pharaoh said, I am God. I dictate what's right and what's wrong. Worship human beings. Worship our values. So in a sense, the 10 plagues were like the 10 ways to contaminate, to defile, to toxify the 10 expressions. And each plague corresponds to another one of defiling another statement. So when God, for instance, the 10th plague is what? Is the striking of the firstborn. At the heart. The firstborn, as I explained in the previous weeks, is the heart and soul of the people. Why? Because Pharaoh and the people, they challenged the statement, Bereshis bara Elokim, that it's God that created heaven and earth. They said, no, we don't need a God. We created it all. We're self-made people. So the striking, the consequence of that, you're self-made people? Okay. Let's see what you can do. And when self-made people make themselves, what happens is they also destroy themselves. So the strike of the firstborn is like the symbolic of challenging their premise. And each of the 10 plagues, going down the line, attacks another one of the 10, was a result of attacking another one of the 10 so-called steps in the blueprint. So if you defile the operator's manual, defy it, there will be consequences. And the 10 plagues correspond to 10 different ways that this psychological state of Mitzrayim, which in our own lives means our own fears, our own insecurities, our own distractions, temptations, everything that pulls us away from our own calling is a form of Mitzrayim, and it will have a consequence because you are essentially undermining and destroying your own building blocks. And if you go through each one of them, you see how that worked. And that I discussed in those weeks, what each of these plagues are psychologically. That the plague, for instance, of dam, blood, was the abuse of dignity, malchus, which corresponds to one of the 10 expressions. What I want to do now is go over to the 10 commandments. Because the 10 commandments now is the healing. No one is perfect in this earth. There's no such thing as a perfect human being. So if you talk about the operator's manual, following the operator's manual, there's no human being on earth that follows it exactly. So we have the operator's manual. That's the 10 ways that God creates the universe, puts it into place. I discussed that in detail before. The 10 plagues correspond to the 10 ways that those 10 dimensions become defiled through human behavior of Mitzrayim and so on. And the 10 commandments is our hope and salvation that comes afterwards and says that we can correct and repair that which is broken. And it's interesting, as you'll see, or I don't know if I'll get to it tonight, but The Ten Commandments, as you know, were the tablets that later Moses actually breaks. So even the Ten Commandments, they also had 2 chances. But for the theme of this discussion, in this week's chapter, is that after the Jews left Egypt, and they saw how low human beings can fall, God now says, you know what? I will not only give you a blueprint how to live your lives, I will also give you a blueprint of 10 steps how to correct the 10 steps when they are abused. Which puts such a so-called rounded, I guess, a full rounded picture here. There's the way the universe is put into place in a healthy way. There's what happens next when human beings make mistakes or go or wander away from their own purpose, their own meaning, their own mission. And now the 10 Commandments come to repair and correct. So what I want to do now is go through the 10 Commandments and describe them, how they correspond to the 10 emotional spheres within us, and how each one is a repair or a healing for another plague, psychological plague. So we'll start, should we start backwards, I guess, or frontwards? I'm not really sure. Let's see. We'll start from the bottom up, I think is the wiser way to go. Because the plagues begin from blood, that the water turned into blood, and if you recall, that is a symbolic of the dignity of a human being, malchus. Everyone has their malchus. And when that dignity is in some way abused, that is plague number 1. What is the repair of that? That thou shalt not covet. You shall not envy another person. So let me analyze that in a little more specific detail. We'll use I guess a Chelem story, if I may. Okay. You've heard of the city of Chelem? Was a little town in Europe, in Poland, where they say intelligent people live, but the neighbors were very resentful of them, so they created this whole folklore of the foolish people of Chelem. So you have to bear with me. The lessons of Chelem are all very psychological. Some of them sound a little funny and strange, but they all have deep lessons. So this guy in Chelem who had an identity crisis, a Chelem type of identity crisis, he once goes to the mikveh, to the bathhouse. And before he gets himself undressed into the bath, to go into the bath, he has a dilemma. He has called a psychological quandary. And that is, once he gets undressed, and he so much identified the way he looked and his dress and the styles and so on, how will I recognize myself when I come out of the bath? That was his problem. So identify himself by his clothing. So he came up with a brilliant idea. He'll tie a little red thread to his toe. So when he comes out of the water, he'll look for the thread, and then he'll know who he is. I know. You'll soon think this can't be me, but you'll soon see we all do this in some way or another. Not exactly like that. So God helps, and what happens in the bath, the thread gets loose from his toe and attaches itself to someone else's toe. So he comes out of the water, starts looking for the thread. That's how he identifies himself. He doesn't know himself, he doesn't has an identity. He cannot feel how he is from within, so he needs a thread to describe him. He looks and finally finds the thread. He goes over to that other guy. He says, I know who you are, but who am I? Now, as I said, these are Chelem stories, but they also have very profound meaning. When someone covets another, is envious of another, you could always rest assured that this person has no clue, or is, at this moment at least, has no clue who they are. Someone who's absolutely secure with what they have and who they are has no need to take another's. It's when you don't have something, you start looking for an identity. So it may not be the thread, but in some way or other, we all do this. Especially in relationships. I cannot tell you how many times I've met couples, or so-called couples, who literally reach to each other, not because out of security and strength and saying, this person is the person I want to be with but it's because of lack of strength, because they're not who they are, and they thought that person is going to give them an identity. Always, it will end in a disaster. There's no way that can last. Even in the so-called perfect, someone told me the expression, perfect dysfunctional structure. There's a perfect dysfunctional structure. What's a perfect dysfunctional structure? When one person is a complete giver, the other one's a complete taker, for example. It's unhealthy, but it's like sounds like balanced. At least they balance each other. Or in this case, a person has a very strong identity, the person has no identity. So it's like a perfect match. You give me identity, and I give you nothingness. So, if we both had identities, it wouldn't be related. We'd be constantly conflicting with each other. This is called, as I think Walter Matthau said it this way, it's called authentic imitation leather. A perfect dysfunctionality. Yeah, it's proud of it, right? So it's like this is authentic dysfunctionality, perfectly rounded. What's not perfect dysfunctionality is, of course, when two people have all kinds of clashing elements. Now, what's wrong with it, of course, is that every human being has an identity. If it was true that one person doesn't have an identity and the other person did, then okay, so you could say it's a perfect match. But the fact is, we were all created with identity, whether you like it or not. This is called malchus. Malchus is your identity. It's unique, it's indispensable, it's special. The fact that you don't feel it's there, or sometimes it goes undercover, is just your awareness. That doesn't mean it's not there. It means either you grew up in a home where it was beat out of you to the point that you lost confidence in yourself. Or the other way around, you were not nurtured enough to allow it to emerge. Or whatever other reasons that people's identity goes under in hiding. And there are many reasons. It could be overt abuse. It could be subtle. It could be a combination of fears and insecurities that shape our lives. The list goes on. You can find many culprits. But they all are. What's common among all of them is it's the plague of malchus. It is the identity of a human being in some way being compromised, if not overtly abused. And therefore, loisachmid is direct healing of it. So yes, look at the difference. If you say, okay, commandment, do not covet in others. Everyone relates to that. Do not covet, do not be envious of another. But if you think of the profundity here, it's much deeper. This is like a real healing to our challenges. To learn, to understand that you have what you were given, that what is given to you is unique to you, and what was given to another is not yours. To understand that is not just being a nice guy and you're not envious of others, you have good midas, you have good, you're a refined human being. It's understanding that you have something extremely valuable. So though the commandment is described in the so-called literal sense, do not covet another, what it's really saying is, honor yourself and honor what was given to you, and automatically you will not covet. But the Ten Commandments, as the Torah in general, is very blunt. It tells you the expression. What's the ultimate expression of a person not honoring themselves? Is by always looking what others have and saying, I want it. Or not allowing, or not begrudging other people of having the gifts and blessings that they have. So the argument can be made, well, what comes first? It's a catch-22 situation. If I have a weak identity or lack of identity, I will automatically covet. So how does the Torah tell me not to covet? How is that going to help? But obviously the 10th commandment is meant to provoke us to think about it and come to a point of understanding that you have something indispensable. And the real solution is find out what you have. And the more secure you are with yourself, guaranteed the more you coexist with others. It's the rule. To give one more statement and then I'll move on. The Kotzker Rebbe said this way. It can be applied in so many different situations. Somewhat poetically, he said, if I am I because you are you, and you are you because I am I will not be and you will not be. But if I am I because I am I, and you are you because you are you will be and I will be. What it means in simple English is that if my identity is defined by its proximity to you, not by self-generated. It's like saying something doesn't really occupy space. The only way you know where it exists is in proximity to other things. And other things don't know where they are. They define themselves in proximity to you. So we're all left with what's called blind leading the blind. Or as a poem I started writing and I never finished, people are watching people, watch people, watch people, watch people. You can go on forever. That's why I didn't finish it. I don't know how far it goes. You know? So we all are defining each other by things that there's no constant. There's no stable place. Can you create a circle without a so-called solid center? There's no center. The center does not hold, as the poets write. And therefore everything else begins to crumble. So what the Kotzker Rebbe is basically saying, the secret to relationships, is I am I because I am I, not because you are you. I react not because my life choices are not a reaction to you. They're a reaction to myself and what I generate. Obviously there will be reactions to others, but it's not only that. Your life is not just the sum total of a product of other people's lives. Not your parents, and not your environment, not society, not politics, and not television, and not all the other gadgets that we all are so in love with. It's a product of something that comes from within you. That's your malchus. So that's commandment number 10. Let's go to number 9. Do not bear false witness on another. Corresponds to Yisod, or in the plagues, it is the Svardeya, the frogs. If you recall, frogs are cold-blooded, which is the antithesis to healthy intimacy or healthy bonding. If Yisod is bonding, so bonding, as you recall, is the emotional faculty called Yisod, going backwards, the 6 of the 7 after Malchus. It's to be intimate with something. It's to connect to it. You can have love, chesed, but not be bonded to it. That's like a love without a commitment. When you talk about Yisod, it's a very powerful emotion. It's the connecting, the commitment to something, the bonding with something, the intimate bonding. Cold-bloodedness, or you can call it cold intimacy, is the antithesis. In the Talmud it says that all human beings are part of one large organism. And we are all intimately connected. Which would, of course, would result in an attitude, if you really felt that no one would be able to hurt another human being. So when you don't feel that intimate connection, what happens? We all think we're self-contained, and bearing witness on another person becomes something that not so difficult to do. If you recall, this corresponds to the 9th expression. God said, I created the human being in the divine image. And the bearing witness on another falsely, which really is the general disrespect of another human being, is a type of cold intimacy. That there may be a connection, people love each other, but then when push comes to shove, there's a certain detachment and coldness that settles in and ultimately reflects the dark side of Yisod, of bonding. So the 9th commandment brings to attention the tikkun, the repair of the 9th emotion, or the 9th faculty rather, and that is Yisod, bonding, intimacy. The 8th is do not steal, which corresponds to the 3rd plague, kinim. Kinim is the lice that comes, as the Torah says, they took the dust from the earth and it produced lice. What is that in the 10 expressions? I'm just checking it up. That the earth produced creatures in this world. Right? If you recall, I talked about the balance, the natural balance. That's a result of it. It corresponds to the 8th faculty, which is the faculty called humility. Hoid. Hoid means humility or yielding. So on the positive quality of yielding and humility, it's when a person feels like dust in a positive sense, like they are humble in the eyes of others before they stand before God and before other people. When does humility become a distortion or a plague? When the humility becomes, as I mentioned the other weeks, you become a doormat that people step on you. When humility comes out of weakness instead of strength. Humility is a great strength, but it also can become a cover, a smokescreen for weakness. And that's when the dust obviously is in the negative sense of it. So the corresponding commandment is lo signiv, do not steal. And that discusses what does that really mean, not to steal from another. Is it lo signiv? Am I right? Just want to make sure. Yeah? Yeah. So on a technical level, everyone understands the commandment of not stealing. We have today, unfortunately, lately, a lot of greed and a lot of litigation going on about people who have stolen from others. So on a very practical, technical level, everyone understands what that means. But ultimately, especially if you look today, you find when you study people who become serial thieves, it always originates in some form of arrogance. It always originates in a form of thinking you can get away with something because you will never be caught. As a matter of fact, in Hebrew, there's a difference between signev and sigzo. There's gzela and gneva. Gzela is out in the open type of theft. Gneva is done in hiding, which of course in many ways is much worse. I mean, each one of them has their own so-called virtues, quote unquote. But in the negative sense, it's doing it in the dark. It's basically fooling others. And there's a certain thrill that suddenly develops that you feel you can get away with it. And then, of course, you minimize the whole thing. So if you're talking about an antithesis to hoid, which is humility, yielding, it's, of course, arrogance. It's a form of arrogance that destroys that feature. So the tikkun, or so-called what the commandment that corresponds to that, is the stealing. Now, stealing, we know, especially according to the commentaries, is not just stealing money or stealing objects. It could also be stealing gnevas das, fooling somebody. Gnevas das is a prohibition where you lie to someone and they make a decision based on something, a distorted fact or misinformation that you provided. It's also called gnevas. Okay, that's good. Deception. So any form of so-called trying to deceive someone else is a form of called gneva, of stealing. You're stealing their mind. You're manipulating. This even includes people we've trusted, authorities we've trusted, parents we've trusted, who we find out later abused our trust. It's another form of gneva. They stole your trust to the point that it's very difficult to retrieve. We all know when you get disappointed, when you're hurt, and your trust has been violated, your privacy has been violated, it's a theft that's even worse than a theft of money. Money you can make back, but trust you don't so easily regain. So this third commandment is very much the ultimate antithesis to humility, yielding, and arrogance. That it's me that matters and no one else, to the point that I don't really care of the consequences of taking away from another, whether it's trust, whether it's money, whether it's other forms of theft. That's number 8. Number 7 is the sexual prohibitions, leisinov, which correspond to, we're now up to hoid netzach. Now netzach, you call wild ambition, like the wild animals, which was that plague. Arav. Wild ambition, wild animals. Now ambition per se is a good quality. It's a fire, it's a drive, it's enduring force. It's necessary for leadership, it's necessary for direction, it's necessary to overcome challenges. What would a person be without endurance or ambition? But where does it go get out of control when it becomes like a wild animal? So Netzach has the other side to it, that's like a wild animal. Sexuality is exactly the same thing. It is perhaps the most potent force in human life. Sexuality has brought people to the greatest of heights, but it also has the power and the ability to destroy us. Because it's like energy, untamed energy. All energy can go both ways. Great energy can destroy, great energy can build. Sexuality can bring a person to the greatest of heights, to the refined levels of nobility and love and giving, which of course is associated with deep pleasure as well. The Torah does not see sexuality as a necessary evil or as some type of contaminated by the original sin. Sexuality is seen, as I've discussed many times, is seen as the highest level a person can reach when it's in a sacred environment, to be as close as you can, to God. And in that context, it therefore has unbelievable power. That's Netzach. It has the power has a drive. You even call it the sexual drive of Netzach. What people will do when they are driven in that way. But what also would people do when they're sexually charged and it's going in the wrong direction? What are they capable of doing? Look in history. If you don't want to look at yourself. People can do the most irrational, destructive things. Things that later, a few minutes later, you look at yourself as being almost like insane human being, wild. And you can't even understand where it came from. Because that's what this type of energy is. It is literally the purest divine energy possible, and when misused, can be the most destructive energy. Everything great can go both ways. So Netzach corresponds to the seventh commandment. I'm losing my numbers, whatever. Hopefully it's the seventh. Okay, good guess. The seventh commandment, which is all about the sexuality of a human being. Again, you have to take the commandment and broaden it out. It's not just don't do this, don't do this. It's about looking at the sexuality of a human being. The seventh commandment is looking at the netzach inside of a person, our drives, our passions, our energy. I'm being concise because you're all very intelligent people, and I know that, as they say, ten l'chacham v'yech kamoid. We plant a little seed, and I'm sure you'll all be able to develop it into full-blown applications. So now we go to the sixth, right? 7, 6? From 7 we go to 6. The sixth is sirsach, murder. And that murder, which corresponds to the Dever epidemic. Okay. To Ferris. Compassion. Compassion. So what connection is there between compassion and murder? It's a good question, right? Well, as I discussed a few weeks ago, there's the crime of compassion. To be murdered, and then murder here can be in many ways: the murder of the soul, the body, anything that murders another. If it comes from a person that's not compassionate, it's not less tragic, but it's not as painful, and also not as destructive. Studies have been made psychologically. Why is it that when parents abuse a child, God forbid, the damage is worse than when strangers do so? If someone's abused, they're abused. I mean, I don't want to use any harsh expressions, but the reason is because parents also love the child. Even the most abusive parents on earth, you'll find that there are moments, and more than moments, where the child has felt great love from that parent. It's the natural thing, biological love that people have, even unhealthy people. That confusion is far, far worse than if you know your enemy. That one day a person who loves you and shows love, and you expect that love, and you respond to that love, and you want to trust that love, and the next day that same person hurts you, it destroys your whole equilibrium. It destroys your inner radar, so to speak. Because then you start wondering what's right, what's wrong. So to know that here's your enemy, has no love for you, doesn't care for you, and they're attacking, at least have clarity. You have clarity, that's an enemy, and that's it. But what's the worst abuse of all? As you said, trust that someone who has compassion and love, Tiferes, and they hurt, that's a very almost... Well, I don't know if I could answer completely how you handle it, but I'll say some things in generic terms. Because I think if anyone that's dealing with something like this, and I'm sure some of you know people that are dealing with it, I would always say that it's not necessarily, group therapy has its benefits, but it's always best to talk about these things more one-on-one for obvious reasons. First of all, privacy, and secondly, every situation is different case by case. So I'm just talking about it in terms that I think are universal enough that we could all relate to, but obviously if I don't get to the bottom of it, it's for that reason. So what you have here is the commandment that says, do not murder. Now you could ask, why do you need a commandment, do not murder? Everyone can figure that out on their own. You could say the other commandments may not be that obvious. But is there anyone that could disagree with do not murder? Well, you know something? Yeah. Look around today. There are people who feel they could murder in the name of God. They feel it's what God wants. You destroy infidels. And then what about the rest of us? How do you deal with war? Okay, so we'll say war is not murder, it's self-defense. What happens if some innocent people are murdered along the way? So it's a very nice statement to say everyone agrees do not murder. We have to define what murder is. Is it ever justified? Is it called murder? What exactly does murder mean? And above all of us, I have no doubt somewhere have murdered somebody. Not with a gun, not with physical death. Murder, as I said, can be many, many forms. So the commandment, do not murder, is much deeper than just don't take a gun to an innocent person and shoot them in the head for no reason. That's the most obvious. It's when there are excuses and there are justifications. And above all, as I said before, do not murder is coming part of the context of 10 commandments, that if you don't have a God, you can justify all types of murders. The Nazis had a very, very rational system of rationalizing why certain human beings on this earth are germs, bacteria. And just like the human body has to expel and destroy mercilessly, the white blood cells destroy germs, infections. So the logic concludes, maybe there's some people in the human race that are also contaminating the rest of the human race. I'd love someone to rebut that purely on logical terms, logical merit. You could just say, what right do you have to call me a germ and so-called, who plays God here? But technically, one could say maybe there are some mutations on this earth that to protect the pure white Aryan race, you have to eliminate. The only answer is that we're human beings, we have no right, and that's why the 10 Commandments begin, there's a God. So murder is not such a black and white thing that everyone can just agree on and so on. So this sixth commandment, which corresponds to Tiferes, goes into a very critical component here. That's not just about not murdering. It's dealing with the fact that the Nazi Germany, they say, they had very strict laws of protecting cats and dogs, pets. But they just simply knew how to compartmentalize very well and didn't apply to human beings, certain human beings. That is much, much more destructive than predators in the wild who don't claim to have compassion. And that's where the real challenge of murder is, where you find justifications. You're a loving person. You're a kind person. And then a moment later, you turn into a monster. So the commandment is addressing and corresponds to the ultimate abuse of compassion, of Tiferes. The ability to justify and say, I'm a refined human being. One of the most chilling parts of watching the story of the Holocaust is not even the murder. It's to see what the people who murdered, what they did at night, when they'd go back home and their parties. The ability to have, on one hand, such culture and such like oblivious, as if this is just the run of the mill, is far more disturbing. If they were animals 24/7, fine. That's also, I'm not suggesting that would have been easier to handle. So when you talk about the Egyptians also had certain elements of compassion. You read in different places. So the abuse of compassion is when that same compassion, the same compassion or loving person is also able to do such atrocious acts. So now we go to the last five. The last five begins the first tablet, working our way backwards, is honoring your parents is the fifth commandment. And that corresponds with, in the plagues, it's Gvura. Gvura is, what is it, Shchin? Man, you really got to be very solid here. Yeah. Yeah, no, Gvura. I just was looking whether it is in, Shchin, boils. Right. The boils, the heating, the anger, the rage. Okay, honoring your parents, that's my favorite one. The hardest commandment of all. It's easy not to murder. Honor your parents. So, there's a question that's asked. The two tablets are 5 of 5 commandments. Some say that the first tablet is the mitzvahs between us and God, and the other one is between us and fellow men. Ben adam l'chaver, ben adam l'makom. Problem is, the last 5 I just talked all fit the bill. But honoring your parents seems to be a mitzvah between human beings. How does it only get to be the 5th commandment, the last one on the first tablet that goes into all the laws between man and God? One God, no idolatry, etc., etc. So I remember it was a while back when I did a weekly radio show here in New York. The station WVD was since sold to the ESPN, 1050 on the dial. And since I refused to do sports radio, I went off the air, and here I am. But I did it for a few years. It was actually it was a lot of fun. It was a live show, 6 to 7 p.m. every Sunday. It was a great slot, and there was it was a live show with a lot of call-ins. And I chose especially offbeat topics, very controversial topics. So one topic, one week, was how to honor parents who don't seem to deserve honor. Agreed, it's a good topic, right? And I opened the phones up pretty early on after saying a few opening remarks. And man, this was something to remember. It's recorded. We have it. There's, I think, a transcript online on our website. It has all the calls. You can check it out. Every call, and it didn't stop ringing. When we finished the hour, there were at least 30 more calls waiting. We just couldn't get to them all. I mean, we took them afterwards and so on. But every call was all kinds of grievances against their people's parents. Everyone had something to say. At some point, I got so frustrated that I said, is there anyone out there that loves their parents? Not one call came in. The only call that came in different was one parent who said, my children are abusing me. That was the only exception. That is true. So I came to a scientific conclusion. Either there's no one on this earth that respects their parents or loves their parents, or people who are attracted to my show don't love their parents. You can pick and choose. What other option is there? I'm being half fictitious here. Anyway, I remember, and everyone had this grievance and that grievance, my mother and my father, that joke of the 3 women in Miami Beach comparing notes about their great sons. And this one says, my son, my 80th birthday. He's such a good son. He flew himself and his whole family down here. We had a week of vacation. And the other Jewish mother says, that's nothing. My son took us all for a month on a safari in Africa. And the third one looked at both of them with compassion, and said, you want to know what a son is? My son is a high-powered attorney. He works in New York. makes so much and so much money an hour, and he goes to therapy 3 times a week, and the only thing he talks about is one thing, me. That's a son for you. So everybody's got the parents is an issue. We are our parents' children. We are our mother's daughters, as they say, and our father's sons. We also are our mother's sons and our father's daughters, but that's the way this question goes. And parents go back before our conscious memories. We've been shaped by the forces that are beyond our control. Now, hopefully everybody here has healthy parents that have shaped you in the most beautiful way. The thing is, that's never that perfect. There's no such thing as a perfect situation. So honoring your parents one is a very critical mitzvah. And what I really said at that radio show was, how do you honor parents who don't seem to deserve honor? There are parents clearly, empirically proven to be abusive, have hurt their children in sometimes the most horrendous ways. Even subtle ways, but horrendous ways. And maliciously, meaning not a mistake, everyone makes mistakes. We're talking about persistent, unhealthy attitudes, abuse in the worst ways. I don't want to mention all the possible ways. And yet the Torah says, 5th commandment, honor your parents. Unconditional. It doesn't say honor healthy parents, honor functional parents, honor good parents. So it's an important question. The Torah in its wisdom did not understand there'll be exceptions. So the response I gave, an explanation I gave there, was this. The Torah is very precise. It doesn't say the mitzvah is to love your parents. It could have said ava. We have a hafta recha kamecha. The word ava, love, is used in the Torah when it wants to use it. It says kabed, to honor. Why not to love? Or some other expression. And this is the reason which on the first tablet. The mitzvah of honoring your parents is not a mitzvah between human beings. It's a mitzvah between you and God. What you are honoring, at minimum, is the life force that came to you through your parents. So at the worst scenario possible, your parents were simply unhealthy agents that brought you life. If you dishonor that, you dishonor yourself. Now, if they're healthy parents, they also earn the right, and therefore there should also be love and other things. But the Torah is not saying love. The Torah is saying the minimum is the honoring the life. It's not about the parent. As a matter of fact, there's a law that if a parent tells you to do something God says not to do, there's no such mitzvah to honor the parent, because the parent cannot defy what God wants. Parents don't own children. It's a gift that was given to them to protect. So in the worst scenario, the Torah is saying, and this I see so many times, many of us who are so angry at our parents, what ends up being is we end up dishonoring our lives. Why is it so related that parents who were unhealthy, dysfunctional, why is it so? Always. Growing up in an unhealthy home, you always have a low self-esteem. Why is that? Because your parents imposed upon you their attitudes, and and projected it, and you've assumed this low self-esteem, which comes from unhealthy parents, who they themselves probably had low self-esteem. What'd you do? You allowed the dysfunctionality of your parents to defile even the life that was given to you. So the Torah is saying, at minimum, honor your life. Learn to distinguish that even if the parents are completely sick and unhealthy, but the life they gave you for some mysterious reason, it came through them. Never dishonor that. And that takes a lot of work. Trust me, it takes a lot of work for people to learn to separate the two. Sometimes you have to tell people, listen, honoring your parents does not mean you have to go home to them for parties or for holidays just because they want to see you. If it's a line of fire, you're supposed to protect yourself. If it's unhealthy parents, don't go home. Sometimes you can honor your parents by not coming around, by building a life, and maybe praying for them, for their souls one day, for being so screwed up. That's also honoring. Who says honoring is on their terms? Just because they say, listen, honor me the way I want to. No one ever said that you have to honor them the way they want. You have to honor them. You're honoring the life that came through them and some of the positive elements. So what does all this have to do with Gvura? Well, Gvura, if you recall, is connected to the negative side of Gvura, is rage, is anger. Most anger and rage is identifiable with our childhoods. You don't just become an angry person when you're 30 years old. It doesn't work that way. Rage Uncontrollable will always come from something that happened much earlier in your life. That's why it's uncontrollable. You show me someone that can't control their anger, and somewhere there's a culprit that goes back in the formative years. Either you had parents that were angry and they expressed it a certain way, so you learned that's a so-called legitimate way to express yourself, quote unquote, not really, but you think it is. Or you have such pent-up anger of your life that you just can't control it. So Gvura is very much related to this whole honoring your parents. One of the ways, the therapeutic ways to help a person get through anger and rage. And remember, anger and rage doesn't mean a raving lunatic where you yell and scream. Some people are so angry you never see it. As a matter of fact, some people create such a facade of nice calmness that itself alerts us can't be that perfect, you know?
Not only that, they turn it against themselves.
Yeah. And so therefore rage and anger is much more complicated than just someone that gets up and screams. As a matter of fact, it's sometimes healthy for some people to scream. I know someone I met, more than one, but one person that comes to mind, I told him, what you should do is just yell and scream. Just don't do it with certain people. Do it, in a private room, or you can come yell and scream at me if you like. I've built up immunity. Or just call an answering machine and just yell, or whatever it is, till the tape runs out. That's what I meant. I'm saying find there's a certain buffers that can deal with it. What I mean by that is, it's sometimes healthy to have that pent-up anger that's never expressed. Now, I remember the person responded to me in a very profound way, which was like almost shocked me. He said to me, if I start yelling, I don't know if I'll ever stop. I mean, it was funny, but it was also serious. He says, I have so much, So, of course, you have to learn to channel it. But not expressing certain things doesn't always mean it goes away. It means, as you said, it implodes internally. So Gevura and its abuse. Gevura, the healthy Gevura I mentioned before, is like the water of the rain. It comes down and drops. So that's measurable. It's this discipline, healthy discipline. What is discipline without love is uncontrollable Gevura. Too much discipline, too much anger, too much pain. And this is the other side of things, and it's very much related to our homes. I would say almost always related to our homes. Even people who've been hurt in school, let's say, really sexually abused in school. Pardon me using a graphic, it's not so graphic, but an example. If you had healthy parents and you came home and they knew how to deal with it, 100 can't even compare that you would be able to deal with it. The problem is often parents don't know how to deal with it or go into denial, and then the rage gets much more intense because your parents who were supposed to be there for you, did not protect you. You know how much anger a child builds up when a parent who was supposed to be for you is not there? Unbelievable amount. That's why, just as a footnote, maybe it's not a footnote, you'll find, for instance, in situations where one parent is abusive and the other was just an enabler, meaning, let's say the father was abusive in some way, and the mother, his wife, said nothing. You'll find often that children will be angry at the mother than at the father. And you could say, well, the mother didn't do anything. And maybe even legitimately she didn't see. Well, it's hard to believe living in a house he didn't see or didn't want to see. Or she had to make a choice. Do I leave my husband, the known evil, etc. But why is anger more against the mother? Because in a way, not that you forgive the father in this case, but he was the evil one. Why didn't you protect me? A child deservedly can expect to be protected by those that are supposed to be their nurturers. So there's plenty of anger against the abusive party, but it could be equal or even worse to the one that didn't protect. Not protecting is just as bad as abuse in the face of abuse. So a lot of the Gevura, as it takes its uncontrollable shapes and forms, is all a result of a distorted kibud avim, meaning so the way to correct that is to review your childhood. Essentially, the fifth commandment is going back to your childhood. So it's much more, again, than just honoring your parents literally. It's a whole picture of your life, your formative years that shaped you. Okay. So we go now to the fourth commandment. If you recall then, I'm not going over to the plagues because I did that. Boils is, what is boils? Boiling and anger, rage. The fourth commandment is Shabbos, right? Up to the fourth? Yes, it's 4. Shabbos corresponds to chesed. So the abuse of chesed is, as I said earlier, love that is either undisciplined or love that is used in the wrong way, or abusive love, etc., etc. There's many ways that love can be abused. What is it in the plagues? Someone can remind me, after boils, what do we got? Hail. Okay, barot. Yeah, if you recall, hail was it's ice. So chesed is love, water. But when water becomes frozen, it's frozen love, so to speak. So it's a distorted form of love. What is Shabbos? Shabbos is sometimes called a matana, a gift, a form of chesed and love. But Shabbos, above all, is one of the cures, the best cure, antidote to a distorted form of love. Shabbos is understanding that your material life is not the center of your life. 6 days of the week you shall work, the commandment says, and the 7th day you shall try to do everything possible to get away from the material immersion in your life. It essentially is an exercise in transcendence. Now, what is love? Healthy love is transcendence. As I've many times explained from the Tanya in chapter 32, where he says, true love, healthy love, is the transcendence of spirit over matter. That even though we are two human beings, and we all have our own self-interests, and our bodies and our material needs may be different, but we transcend our material because we have a soul that connects. That's the essence of love. That's what he says in Tanya. The ability to transcend material divisions, to connect to a spiritual union. Shabbos is the epitome of that transcendence. Now, there are people who keep Shabbos, but Shabbos doesn't keep them, so to speak. There are people who keep Shabbos, but are not Shabbosdik. Just like there are people who eat kosher, but are not kosher, if you know what I mean. It doesn't permeate you. What is Shabbos as it permeates a person? And not just someone who eats cholent and knows how to sing the songs and then falls asleep at the same place on the table. The spirit of Shabbos is the spirit of getting beyond your selfishness and being able to enter a spiritual place, which is why Shabbos is connected to Shalom Bayis, domestic tranquility, peace at home. It's connected to love. Friday night is considered a night of sacred love between a husband and wife. And it's connected to transcendence. Unfortunately, many Shabbos tables are not experienced as such, but when it's experienced correctly, it can be a remedy to most of the ills of the week, because it's truly a time of soul experience. I grew up in a home where Shabbos was that way. It's not that common. Where you come and you actually feel, not just that everyone's exhausted and you don't have to go to work the next day, but actually you feel uplifted that you're now in a new plane. It's like a new space, a oasis in time, as some people put Shabbos, an oasis in space. And that is the ultimate remedy to any distortions in chesed and love, any frozen love and any of that, because it comes to a point of not being about you. Because then there's the other side of love, selfish love. Not transcendent love, not the Shabbos type of love, but a selfish love. It's about me. Just like I have a need to eat, to sleep, and then other needs, I also have another need. I need nurturing. I need companionship. I need intimacy. I need love. It's not about giving, it's about taking. So Shabbos is the antidote to distorted chesed. We come now to the last three, which is the 7th, the 8th, 9th, and 10th. The 8th commandment is to not use God's name in vain, which corresponds to Bina, right? Bina. Remember, we're not using das because we're using Keser, the crown, of the 10th sphere, not the das. We're not talking about knowledge. So Bina is understanding. If you remember, understanding is fleshing out of an idea. And the distortion of that, if you recall, is what plague does the Bina correspond to? It's Arba, right? Yeah. Division between higher and lower. Yeah. Bina is necessary in the intellectual process, briefly, because it takes a concept, a kernel of an idea, and develops it. But we all know when you develop an idea, and you lose sight of the point of departure, you can go off on a wild goose chase. So being on a plague level is like cognitive confusion, basically. Confusion by the details, confusion of losing sight of the purpose, losing sight of the destination, losing sight of the departure. All the confusion that comes with being overwhelmed by the details of your life, basically. That's what being is on the unhealthy. And the healthy, it's fleshing out the details of any idea that's necessary to implement it. But when it's unhealthy, it becomes a mass confusion and chaos. That's essentially what the plague is. As I discussed in the plague weeks, if you can call it that, it was about the plague is on a cognitive level. So though it's not an emotional type of plague, but it's a cognitive one, which is equally problematic. When a person believes in God, you could say, who cares? So he used the expression that used God in the name of God in the wrong way. Some people even dismiss this commandment as very primitive. What you say with your mouth, what is this? Some type of God that's like insulted when you use his name in the wrong way. Like a boss that overheard you say something bad about him. But it's much more profound than that. As I said earlier, God and the acceptance of a God, if it's purely on a theoretical level, but it does not permeate your being, meaning your words and your actions. So it's a measure of faith, but it's still missing a key component, which is called integration. Integration. When you're talking about, let's say, the discovery of truth, so you need two elements. You need some, as I said, kernel, some type of key component that is like a compass, a center point that keeps you honest. But you also need it to permeate your life. I'll just give an example in our lives. I'm sure there's no one here that has not had in their lives a moment of truth, a magical moment. That's the easy part. The hard part is maintaining it the next day. A moment of deep inspiration, something really lifted you up. We all know what happens after a few hours, a few days pass, and it goes away. Sad, but it happens all the time. So the challenge of maintaining a relationship with the divine truth, or any truth, is not just having those moments. It's integration, bina, fleshing it out, and not getting lost in the confusion of a whole bunch of details that are not connected to some root, some source. So the expression in the broadest sense, when you say a person uses God's name profanely or inappropriately or in vain, it's really what it's really stating is that you may have a God somewhere in your system, but it's far from having been integrated into your life, into your behavior. You want to see a truly divine person? Don't wait for the moment when they pray, or from the moment when they're standing Yom Kippur in the holiest moment of the year. You have to look at them when they're eating and sleeping and the details of their lives. That's where you'll see divinity. The divine people I've met in my life, not that many, but those that I did, you see the beauty in them in things that are complete details, in Bina, not in the Chokhmah. You see it in the details of their lives, how they're permeated, where it's not so dramatic. What is the most moving thing you see when you see newborn children with parents? It's not when there's a birthday party or there's a celebration and everyone's coming around, there's pictures and all of that. The real profound beauty is when there's no one around and a mother cradles her child. Even things that are like diapering a child, even things that are not always that pleasant. The silent little details of life, when they're permeated with a higher truth, that's where magic really happens. It's one thing, we all can rise to the occasion at certain moments to behave accordingly. But it's the silent moments, it's like the unsung heroes, the things that are invisible. The things in your life that nobody is going to make a whole dramatic fuss about. It's not glamorous. Those little details. People who have made the gestures to you like that in your life, where they were not honored by it, they may not even have known what they've done. But you know what they did. A certain gesture they may have done that didn't get any rewards or awards or anything, Those details, when they're permeated with truths, that's when you know God has entered the room, so to speak. So Bina is the details. And the antithesis to it is when a person who has God in one place, but God has not permeated their mouths, their behavior, their actions. That's the third commandment. The second is do not have false gods, which corresponds to that statement, dividing light from dark, and of course the plague of darkness. What is Chachma and Bina? Chachma is seen as the flash of an idea, light. I saw the light. Bina is the development of an idea. Chachma is clarity. The clarity of cognitive clarity that a person has. Its antithesis is darkness. Its positive is Vayhi Or, let there be light. The plague of darkness was that the Egyptians built false gods. They had their own god. The Nile was a god. Pharaoh saw himself as a deity. That's self-worship. Okay, so you shall be plagued. You instead of seeing light of what is true, divine, you made yourself into the divine. So you'll have a plague of darkness. You'll lose sight of what is real. You'll lose sight of all clarity. So in our own psychological terms, Chachma is a very powerful force. Is that first spark that comes to a person, which is usually the clearest point of clarity. You look at projects, major projects. Always go back to the moment when it was conceived, and you'll see it was all there. There's some power to that initial step. No one knew at the time where it's going. Many of these ideas just dissipate. But you look at and you read books about some of the greatest concepts ever discovered, whether it was Einstein or others, you go to that moment when they discovered it. Those weird moments, usually bizarre, even accidental if there's such a thing. And it's an amazing thing that there was a moment of like a burst of lightning that just came into existence. And then, of course, the key was that they acted on it, that they followed up on it. What's the antithesis of that is darkness. When a person does not have that type of clarity. It's like living in a dark place where you can't see clearly. I'm sure we all had moments like that. So the second commandment, do not have false gods. False god is when you worship something that is not real. You replace the real God. You built an idol. And then always the next result will be a lack of clarity. God creates clarity because He creates focus. And finally, the 10th commandment, which corresponds to the 10th plague. I began Bereshis, B'chayros. It is the essence of all the commandments, which is, I am your God. Not the negative, do not have false gods, but have a God. People can argue, what do I need a God for? Well, if nothing else, it means that it's not all about you. There's something higher to life than you are. I've even heard from many people who call themselves atheists that they have no problem with the concept of something greater than I. And frankly, many people of faith are also pretty selfish. Doesn't mean that because you believe in God, you don't worship yourself. The concept of understanding that there's something more to life than yourself, it's not all about you, is of course the essence of all growth, the essence of all transcendence, and therefore is the first commandment. And the sphere is its keser, it's where the conscious meets the unconscious. It's where a conscious human being makes a decision to understand that what I don't know is always going to be more than what I know. It's a submission, it's a surrender, not out of weakness, out of strength, to understand that the horizons of life are much broader than you and I will ever know. This doesn't make us stupider, it makes us smarter. It's an acknowledgement that there's a reality that is much greater than we will ever be. And when a person comes to that place, in an interesting way, the doors between the unconscious and the conscious open up. There were those that William Blake wrote, Beyond the Doors of Perception. Some people know it by the popular rock band who call themselves the Doors, based on that. And many people on that level, including Jim Morrison, were unable to really enter those doors and come back to tell about it. They entered and didn't return. Wherever they ended up, in Paris or OD'd here in Greenwich Village or wherever it was that his colleagues did. These are people who went through the doors. No one denies they had unbelievable talent, but they couldn't come back and they couldn't contain it. It is ultimately Anochi, the first commandment, that allows a person to enter into the garden, which refers to having a mystical or unconscious experience and bridging it to the conscious. This requires definitely much more elaboration than I can give right now. But suffice it to say that the first of all commandments is the connection of the infinite and the finite, of the heaven and earth, basically. The thing that most of us look for, and that is, can we connect to something eternal in our temporary lives? So that first commandment says, if you connect as the force to realize there's a reality that's greater than yourself, which is really what God means, then you open up that channel and door. And when you don't, what happens is death, the death of the firstborn, that the greatest strength you have will die. And you see this, as I mentioned. That's why I mentioned those brilliant young people in their 20s, whether it was Hendrix or Janis Joplin or Morrison, or for that matter, Rothko and others, who saw unbelievable heights, but they could not contain it. They could not bridge the two worlds. This is the challenge and curse of many people who crave for the high, but they cannot come back and ground it into this world. Ultimately, this is the greatest challenge of Judaism, is how do you bring both together? How do you bring the infinite into the finite without destroying the finite and without compromising the infinite? So this requires, as I said, a longer discussion. It's the essence of the unity between heaven and earth. If you want to read more on it, it's in the chapter on unity in my book, Toward a Meaningful Life. But here is a summation of the time we had of the Ten Commandments. And if you see them, each one of them is a whole volume of itself. You could write a book. And they're all basically antidotes, healing agents to 10 plagues that plague and affect the operator's manual of the 10 statements, the 10 expressions, Asar Mamaros. And they all come together in our own personal selves. And I guess you can consider this class more than as like a seminar on this thing, because it's so much material. I hope I didn't overwhelm myself and you with all these numbers in this. There's a lot to balance here. But as I said earlier, I hope this is a plants a seed, because the goal here is not just to be comprehensive about it. It's most above all, it's to personalize it. Each of us has our own challenge. I will not say you should try to tackle all 10. It's hard enough to tackle one. So we have to choose one that resonates, where you feel you're at, and begin with that, and focus on it, and you'll see you can get to places. It also gives a whole different light on the 10 Commandments. It's a lot more than just nice 10 mitzvahs. Do not kill, do not steal, and so on. Of course, it has the simple meaning, but really these are, as I said before, 10 prototypes. They're 10 life attitudes, which address everything from sexuality to dignity to abuse to parents to God, the basic principles of everything we struggle. So, this 3-part series, we did 2 parts on the 10 plagues, psychological plagues, and now the 10 commandments. Let's see whether there'll be more 10s as they come along in the future weeks. Now I'm back here, so our classes will continue now this Wednesday, next Wednesday. The next class of my brother's we scheduled, it's in the calendar already. It will be March 3rd. If those of you that are coming to those classes that my brother gives on Tuesday nights. And we also, as I mentioned, I believe that Purim will have a Purim party on the 10th. Let's put it this way. We're landing now after the flight, so I'm just getting down grounded a little to practical announcements. And I want to thank everyone again for your participation, partnership in this, because this is a two-way street, even though I do most of the talking, all of it for that matter. But I really believe that it's a symbiotic connection. And again, as you see, this place is going to continue to evolve and become hopefully a true hub of life. So we welcome you here. We shall soon have, with the help of Isaac and some other good friends, a very even more beautiful, warm place. You can come hang out for a coffee. A library will be here, but it's all coming. We haven't yet even had the grand opening. So with that being said, you've run out of notes, right? So we get notes here. I get notes at 60 minutes, 70 minutes. It's already beyond 120. It's hit the, whatever, what do they call? The limit. So everyone have a very good night, a very blessed week. And I hope to see you again next Wednesday night. Now you go to meaningfullife.com. You can see there's a calendar of all updated events that go on here. And again, I announce those that are interested in studying one-on-one or small groups, please let me know. Those that have contacted me and haven't yet heard back, it's simply because, forgive me, we're still trying to organize it. We have people, but it'll take a few more days. So, with that being said, Laila Tov, Dobre Večer.